everyone. I'm Kevin Marr, product manager at Looker, and today we're going to talk about scalable model development. So we have a great talk to have you guys today. We have 45 minutes together. We're going to break that down into two parts. First, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the evolution of modeling. Basically, how do best practices for model development evolve? And how are they different at companies of different scales? So I'll be talking about that as it applies to small business, medium business, and finally, enterprise. Then for the second half of the 45 minutes, we're going to move into a panel discussion to talk about real-world experiences from some of our most experienced customers. Abias Avasalam from Infusionsoft, Jason Gantz from GoCanvas, and Rohan Thakur from WeWork. All right, so evolution of modeling. I was really excited to do today's talk today, primarily just because I've been at Looker for a really long time, at least in Looker years. It's a long time, about 4.5 years. And I've had the great opportunity of working with all of you at various stages of your life cycle as a customer, right? From prospects that are just trying out Looker in a trial, to old-time customers that used Looker back in the 1.0 days. Thank you for your patience and for sticking with us. From 10-person startups to 10,000-person enterprises across every vertical, right? E-commerce, finance, construction, trucking, right? And so across all of these customers throughout my years at Looker and various roles I've held here, people have asked me all kinds of questions, right? Things like, how should I structure my team to best support our users? How do I balance governance with flexibility? How or even when should I use PDTs in my model? How do I enforce best practices? Or how do I build a model that supports thousands of users, right? And so the way that it usually goes is that we're usually at their office, we're in a conference room, they're asking me all these questions. I'm sitting down next to them, looking at them and nodding, saying yes, saying Kevin this, Kevin that. How do I do it? And I turn to them, I look into their eye, I hold their hand, and I tell them very softly, what would a JavaScript developer do? And I kid a little bit. Maybe JavaScript is not the pinnacle of computer science, but really could have been any programming language. My point is that a LookML model is a software product, right? Think about it, right? What do we have with a LookML model? It's built with code, right? It's an object-oriented language. It's version controlled, right? Something we all have grown to love quite a bit. We have customers, right? They might not be people that necessarily pay us, even if you want them to pay you more. But certainly customers that make complicated requests of us that shape the actual software product itself. And then finally, nobody likes bugs, right? We're trying to build this in a way that gives a very consistent and stable experience to our customers. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about just some of the tips and tricks and recommendations I've gathered over my couple years at Looker, starting with a small company from just less than 50 users, then to a medium-sized business between 50 and 500 users, and finally to enterprises where you have kind of considered 500 plus. All right, so we'll talk about the small business first. Let's talk about the profile of a small business. Typically at these companies, you have maybe only one primary analytics developer, or maybe their title isn't even analytics developer. Maybe it's just an operations person who happens to know SQL, right? But definitely you don't have dedicated data engineering. Analytics might not even be a team or department that you have. The whole company operates as one business unit, right? departments might be silly when a department is just one person. Your end users tend to wear a lot more hats, so they're used to being scrappy. They're not used to having things fed to them, so they're probably a little bit better conditioned to use the resources they have and be resourceful. So what's the strategy for a small business then? First, while the company is small, that's a really good time to focus on data culture, right? I've talked to a lot of really big companies that said like, well, I don't think people really need to explore beyond the dashboard. They don't have those follow-up questions. And that works for some people, but a lot of people get a lot of value out of explore, right, with Looker. And when the company is small, that's your best chance at actually shaping people's ability to self-serve and learn, explore, and learn to think analytically. And in order to do that, you can leverage the fact that they probably are a little bit scrappier, working in a smaller team. So really, you just need to focus on training them with Looker and your other tools, and making sure that they have the tools they need to succeed. Second most important thing with a small deployment, and this doesn't have to be just a small company, but you could be your own isolated business unit within a larger company, but it's to run lean. So who here has ever read The Lean Startup or heard of the term lean, running lean? Cool, I see actually quite a bit of you, which is great. The idea with running lean is that you shouldn't spend too much time thinking about what the perfect product would be without actually talking to your users and letting them try it and then iterating on validated learnings, right? You shouldn't be thinking about how your model should look next year if the whole company might not even exist next year. So what are some tips here? First, don't build your own ETL. Sometimes I've talked to startups that come to me and said, oh, well, we have one of our lead developers who's spending 80% of his time building his own pipelines, right? Don't do that. Smack you right in the conference room and steal your Cokes and leave. If you're distracting your engineers from building your actual product, that's the wrong thing. And fortunately, in today's day and age, we have a whole industry dedicated just to doing ETL, right? You've probably met them over there. We have, I think, 4 or 5 partners that just are only focused on this problem, right? And the benefit of being a small company is that you have no IT department. Most of your tools are just point solutions, right, that do various things, and maybe you stitch them together through an API. But the great thing about these point solutions is that they'll have consistent backend, and they'll collect data the same way. And so the way that you ETL them can be reused from company to company. That's why this industry, this ETL industry, was created. And then when it comes to using PDTs with Looker, use them. We don't consider PDTs to be a full ETL solution at Looker. We don't claim to be an ETL company, but certainly for a small company, PDTs will be more than enough, right? A PDT is great because it enables someone who's not a data engineer to do data engineering tasks. All you need to know is SQL or even just LookML to get started materializing data, rolling up things, and improving performance. And as I mentioned, again, don't hesitate to leverage ETL. Talk to our partners out there. They'd love to talk to you, I'm sure. You maybe also rack up some points to get some nice swag. And to complete that picture, at Looker, with our partners, we've developed LookML blocks. And so LookML blocks are ways to, again, leverage the repeatability of those known schemas and create a LookML model that works right out of the box for Salesforce or for Marketo or for MailChimp or whatever it is that you might be ETLing into your database. And then finally, as I mentioned before, for a small company, make sure to focus on analysis and setting that culture. All right. That was a small company. Medium business. That's what some people call it, mid-market, which we're talking about as a deployment of Looker between 50 and 500 users. At this scale of a deployment, it's pretty common to have an actual data team now, right? We have people and their actual full-time job is just to uphold the data pipeline and do analytics, which is great. And that's their full-time job. Now also, as the business grows, which is all good things, as more people and use cases come onto Looker, those combined in kind of an exponential way in terms of how it affects complexity. So complexity now is something that we have to think about and manage. We can't just be so fast and loose with the way that we model. And now we actually do have different departments, not just Sally who does finance, right? There's might be a whole finance team that upholds that side of the business. And they're going to need their own dedicated KPIs and dedicated models. So what are some tips for the medium-sized business? I'll do strategy. So the strategy for the medium-sized business is to really build a foundation to let you scale. At this phase of your company or business unit, you really should be optimizing for growth, right? So now that we've proven the product market fit, we have traction, hopefully, in whatever it is that we're doing or the service or products that we're offering. How do I make sure that I can build the model in a way that will work today, but also work next year when we expect to be 10 times the size? So the first thing about LookML, and in my opinion, one of the best things about LookML, is that it enables you not to repeat yourself over and over and over when you're writing SQL, right? When you write an SQL query, oftentimes what you're doing is just looking back at previous queries you've written, mixing and matching different parts of your select statement, parts of your where clause, part of your joins, and then combining that in new ways. And LookML does all that for you. And we have tools in place specifically so that you don't have to repeat yourself. Generally speaking, if you're modeling Looker and you find yourself copy and pasting one part of the model and sticking it somewhere else, you're probably doing it wrong. So you can use things like the $ curly brace to directly reference another LookML object you've already written, rather than making another direct column reference. You can do things like hiding a field, not because it's an actual field that people would use analytically, but just to wrap an object around some reusable code. And you can hide it so that people don't actually use it for analysis, but you can still reference it in other fields. Take advantage of things like named value format. This is a way to format a field in a high-level model, and then just reference that directly rather than typing out a new format string every time. And finally, you should use extensions. Extensions are ways of inheriting one object and using that to build a new object without having to redeclare all the properties of that old object. I mentioned that there are usually multiple models, multiple departments, and they each should probably need their own model at this point. To have one model for everyone can get a little bit tricky because all the fields are building up, and you have fields that you might not understand in your team that make a lot of sense to other teams, and it gets really busy. So it's better to let the departments have a little bit of ownership of their own models at this point, while still keeping that usually in the same project. And even though there are different models, doesn't mean that you can no longer reuse logic between them, right? We have extensions that enable us to create generic objects which can then be shared and reused across the models to keep consistency, not only from team to team, but across the company as a whole. This is just a fun one. I had a couple features that I realized nobody knew about, so I thought I'd just sneak it into the presentation somehow. IDE Mastery actually becomes a big deal at this scale of a Looker deployment, right? It's someone's actual full-time job to write LookML, right? When you think about that, their job is to write LookML. Actually, kind of scares me, probably more than it scares you. But that means that the ergonomics and the hotkeys and those kinds of things actually can add up to quite a bit in terms of someone's productivity doing this full-time job, right? So things like regex replace, right? Who knew that in the top of the IDE, if you hit that search bar, you can type in a regular expression and find some pattern across the whole project, right? Some people, but not all, right? It's actually a really powerful thing. What if I want to adjust every time frame in my whole model to include the month number, right? Rather than just trying to find every single one, every project by clicking and scrolling, let's actually just edit all those at once, right? So it behooves the LookML developer to maybe take a couple minutes to learn about regular expressions. Here's one. Fast file switching. Who knew that when you press Command-J, you can type in a file name, search for a file, and hit Enter, and it immediately switches you over? Like 3 people. Yeah, that's what I thought. So we're going to work on that. We're going to work on making that more discoverable, but that's a big one. That'll save you a lot of time, right? What's another one? This one I like. This one tends to blow people's minds. If you control-click in LookML on a reference to another object, it'll jump you right to that file, so you can see the definition of that object, right? This is a really quick way. People are scoffing at this new knowledge. This is a really quick way just to browse a project and get an understanding for, hey, what is this thing I'm using here? And what is the thing that that thing uses, and so forth. ETL. So for the small business, when someone mentioned ETL, I smacked them in the face. This time, I say, OK, you have a point. PDTs aren't going to scale forever. They'll get you pretty far. But at some point, as patterns emerge in the company and things are better known, we've vetted the importance of certain KPIs, it's less volatile, that's when it makes sense to actually move ETL down stack. And why would we do that? Because when we move ETL down stack, it's typically much more scalable, right? Now all the ETL is not happening at the very end in SQL. It's perhaps being done database layer or earlier. So now the database isn't recomputing all of this logic with every query or every night or what have you. And I like to talk about the data stack as this volatility spectrum, right? As you move up stack, volatility increases, right? The number of requests people have about the fields that should exist, the metrics that should exist, and those kinds of things, that goes up the higher you get to the reporting surface, right? So you should definitely tool your data stack in a way that matches that volatility. And as you grow as a company, certain patterns start to emerge. You know, hey, I know with certainty that people are always going to care about net revenue or some other like customer health score has been defined this way. And I know this so well that I don't have to just leave it in LookML. I can actually bake this lower down the ETL so I can get better efficiencies of scale. Enforcing good code. LookML, unfortunately, as much as I would like to say it does. It doesn't write itself, right? JavaScript doesn't write itself either. And ultimately, some things about how you build the product, you're going to have to fix through people and the way that you work together, not just with the code you push into the repository, right? So at this stage of a company, you really should be writing a style guide. How do you expect people to write good code, right? We support Markdown in LookML, so you can write up a nice Markdown document, make that your landing page in the IDE, and at least put a little bit of effort in to make sure that people read that before they start contributing. As further enforcement for good code, you can also start leveraging pull requests in Looker. We integrate with several Git vendors, and you can actually open a PR right from Looker, links you right over to the Git host, where one of your peers can actually review your code and either approve it or reject it before it goes into production. Content management. A lot of content can get created in a medium-sized business. So as it proliferates, it might become challenging to monitor all of it. We have the content validator today that's designed to go through all of your content and tell you which ones are broken and which ones aren't by potential changes in the model. That way you can put a step in to make sure you're not breaking things out from under people. And then finally, LookML dashboards. This is not the default way of creating dashboards, but people use this usually to leverage Git. Again, Git is our friend, version control is our friend. LookML dashboards is going to be a really good way to add a little bit more rigor to the way that people collaborate around key company metrics. Wonderful. All right, enterprise. So for the enterprise profile, this is when business units can operate like entirely separate entities or entirely separate companies, right? Big companies tend to acquire a lot of companies that become subsidiaries. And those can have completely different data culture and different data tools and different data stacks. The variety of use cases is often too large at an enterprise for one central BI team, no matter how large, to efficiently manage, right? It eventually just becomes too big, and you have to do something to, well, protect your sanity, but also still enable governance and consistency across the whole enterprise. All right, the last 2 points are self-evident. Let's move ahead. So what's the strategy for an enterprise? We need to balance consistency in modeling and governance with flexibility and autonomy. So I call it controlled autonomy. Basically, those business units and subsidiaries that probably have their own analytics tools and own analytics resources, let them own their own model, right? Let them own their own project, maybe even their whole instance. But we have tools in place and tools that we're actually working on today in the model to still guarantee consistency even in that scenario. We call it project import, as you can see there. And then second to an enterprise, you should really start thinking about how you develop and deploy LookML. And so start looking to software development teams and how they interact and how they push code and how that code works its way from unstable to staging to production and so forth. All right, so I want to take a moment to talk about project import. This is actually a labs feature that we're improving and taking out of beta before the end of the year. This is the ability for one project to include a file from an entirely separate project. Could be in the same instance or totally not in the same instance. It could even just be a Git repository somewhere. But this is a really important mechanic or tool because it lets us import code across projects. And so when you have those separate business units with their entirely separate instances or projects, they can still be inheriting canonical, best practice LookML objects from a core set of LookML models, views, explorers, and so forth. And for those of you who have coded significantly in other languages before, this is very similar to the concept of package management, right? How can I reuse codes? I'm not reinventing the wheel every time I want to build a new use case or adapt a new data set. Cool. And the project import enables us to pursue a unique pattern. And some of you might already be familiar with this, maybe nodding your head a little bit. We call this the hub and spokes model. And so at a large enterprise, you'll likely have a core business intelligence team. Again, they're the ones that are responsible for the core metrics, the main data tools, and so forth. They're going to define the truth, right? The canonical metrics. And then your business units can be spoke projects that inherit from that hub. So it enables the business units to own their own model with their own analytics resources, but still be able to borrow from that recommended, that shared modeling logic. Some people might take an advanced approach where you have an explorable, or rather where the hub is not explorable. It's only available for extending. And so even to explore the hub, you would have a spoke project that just extends from there. I can talk about that more later, but it's cool. Some other considerations of the hub and spoke model: don't put PDTs in the hub, because then every spoke project is also going to inherit that PDT, and now suddenly Looker is asking your database to materialize the same table many, many, many times. And besides, at that level of scale, again, we talked about that volatility spectrum. We don't really need PDTs anymore, at least not in the core project. Also, you can leverage, we implemented a new feature a couple months ago, the ability to authenticate to Git hosts via HTTPS instead of just SSH deploy keys. And this enables you to have per user authentication to your Git host. So you can say, hey, this user is allowed to commit to the core model, and this user is not, even though they have the same permissions in Looker. This is a fun one. Unit testing. Who here is familiar with unit testing? Okay, actually, pretty good amount of people. That's good. That's great. So this is the concept of testing pieces of your code base by giving it controlled inputs and then testing that that unit of code returns the output that you expect. We already have the LookML validator in Looker that validates for LookML syntax. But this allows you to check for logical errors, right? For example, how do I make sure that my net revenue for April 2016 always equals, $10 million or whatever it is? If I've done something kludgy in my model, I would probably break that. And so unit testing is a beta feature that we have launched recently, and you can ask your favorite DCL support rep or email me directly if you know my email for access to it. It's a closed beta for now. But these are examples of tools that we're launching to further push the level of sophistication in enterprise deployments. And then finally, staging environments. Some tests aren't best done in the developer mode or in your dev branch. Some tests are better done after things have already been kind of staged up as one cohesive model in some sort of pre-production state. And when you get to that level, you want to have that staging environment, right? We call it a staging environment in Git workflows. This is where you can do things like user acceptance testing, integration testing if you're embedding it, load testing. And so to support this, Looker is integrated with Git. So there's a couple different things you can do to set up this idea of staging. Here's a really simple setup. You have two Looker instances. One's Looker dev, one's Looker prod. Looker dev interacts with the Git repo in the regular fashion. We recommend that you use PRs, pull requests. But Looker dev is actually using, whoops, that's supposed to say prod on the right. Imagine it says prod. The one on the right is also using the same repository. But what you can do is set up and say to that prod instance, hey, when I push new things to my repository, I don't want you to automatically take those changes. I want you to actually wait until I tell you, right? And telling you is by hitting Looker's deploy webhook. You can look that up on Google. Looker deploy webhook. It'll tell you all about it. A more advanced workflow might have actually two separate repos altogether. You have your Looker dev instance that communicates as regular or as usual with its own repository. And that way you can push things to master. You can do whatever else you want with the repo without having to worry about the fragility of accidentally hitting a deploy webhook to deploy to production. And you can, most importantly, you can revert commits if you want. And with this setup, you would then have some sort of transit repo. It pulls from the dev repo, and then it pushes. So you do git pull dev, git push prod into the production repo. And then again, our friend, the deploy webhook, can then tell the production instance to say, hey, you can now pull down your code changes.